Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Here's something that surprises almost everyone who hears it for the first time. Across Europe and North America, more women are converting to Islam than men. Not by a small margin either. In several Western countries, researchers estimate that women make up roughly two-thirds of all adult converts to Islam. That number tends to stop people in their tracks, because it clashes so directly with the story most of us have been told. We're used to hearing that Islam restricts women, that it limits their choices, their freedom, their voice. So why would so many Western women, raised with all the freedoms of modern secular society, actively choose to join a faith that's constantly portrayed as working against them? By the end of this video, you'll understand the real reasons behind this trend, and I think some of them might surprise you. Let's get into it. This isn't a new phenomenon, but it is an accelerating one. Since the early 2000s, researchers studying religious conversion in Western Europe and North America have consistently documented the same pattern. Women converting to Islam outnumber men, sometimes by a ratio of 2 or even 3 to 1. What makes this especially striking is the cultural backdrop it's happening against. Western media coverage of Islam overwhelmingly focuses on restriction, headscarf bans, debates about modesty, stories of women escaping conservative households. Rarely do we see coverage of women actively, deliberately choosing the faith as adults, with full knowledge of Western alternatives readily available to them. And yet it keeps happening. Mosques across London, Paris, Berlin, and cities throughout the United States report a steady, ongoing stream of Shahada ceremonies involving women from Christian, secular, and non-religious backgrounds. So, what's actually driving this? This wave of Western female conversion isn't as sudden as it might appear. Researchers trace its modern roots back to the 1970s and 80s, when the first noticeable clusters of Western converts began appearing in university towns and major cities, often connected to the growing academic study of comparative religion and philosophy. The trend picked up meaningfully after the September 11th attacks in 2001, not for the reason many people assume. Rather than pushing people away from Islam, the intense media coverage that followed had an unexpected side effect. It made information about the faith far more accessible than ever before. Curious people who might never have encountered Islamic teachings in any depth suddenly had documentaries, books, translated texts, and public lectures readily available. For a small but meaningful number of them, that access opened a door rather than closing one. Since then, the trend has only grown, accelerated further by the internet. Online communities, YouTube lecture series, translated Quranic study groups, and social media accounts run by converts themselves have made it easier than ever for a curious woman in a small town, with no local Muslim community at all, to explore the faith privately at her own pace, before ever setting foot in a mosque. Let's start with a story, because numbers only tell part of it. Sophie, not her real name at her request, grew up outside Manchester in a family she describes as culturally Christian but practically atheist. Church was for Christmas and funerals. Faith in any serious sense simply wasn't part of daily life. At 24, working in marketing and living what she calls a fairly typical modern life, Sophie says she felt something many people her age describe, but rarely name directly, a persistent, low-grade emptiness. I had everything I was supposed to want, she told researchers documenting her story. A good job, an active social life, total freedom to do whatever I wanted, and I still felt like something was missing. A colleague at work happened to be Muslim. Casual lunchtime conversations turned into real questions about purpose, about structure, about what it actually meant to build a life around faith rather than around achievement or consumption. Sophie started reading. She visited a mosque during an open day. She met other converts, women who had walked the same path years earlier. 18 months later, she took her Shahada. People assume I gave something up, she said. What I actually feel is that I finally put something down, this constant pressure to prove myself, to consume more, to be endlessly optimizing my life. Islam gave me a framework, a sense of enough. Sophie's story isn't unique. It's echoed with different details in interview after interview with Western female converts. And that repetition points to something structural, not just a series of individual coincidences, but a real pattern worth understanding. Not every conversion story looks like Sophie's. Take Elena, a nurse in her late 30s from a small city in the American Midwest, raised Catholic, but drifting away from the church since her teenage years. Elena's path started not with curiosity about theology, but with grief. After the sudden loss of her father, she found herself, in her words, desperately searching for something that made death make sense. Traditional grief counseling helped, but it didn't touch the deeper spiritual questions she was wrestling with. A patient at the hospital where she worked, an elderly Muslim woman recovering from surgery. Spent weeks talking with her about faith, patience, and what Islam teaches about loss and the afterlife. She wasn't trying to convert me, Elena said. She was just answering my questions honestly without judgment. Over the following year, Elena began attending a local mosque's weekly women's study circle. She converted roughly 14 months after that first hospital conversation. Two very different women. Two very different starting points, one driven by intellectual and social curiosity, the other by grief and a search for answers. But both arrived at the same destination, through the same underlying process, sustained, patient exposure to real Muslim community, followed by independent study, followed by a deliberate adult choice. When sociologists and religious studies researchers sit down and actually interview Western female converts, rather than speculate about their reasons from the outside, the same handful of explanations come up again and again. Number 1, a search for structure and meaning. Modern secular life offers enormous freedom, but freedom without structure can feel disorienting. Many converts describe feeling adrift in a culture that constantly tells them to define their own values from scratch, with no shared framework to lean on. Islam offers a complete, coherent system, 5 daily prayers, a clear moral code, a defined community that many women describe as genuinely stabilizing rather than restrictive. Number 2, a reevaluation of modesty and objectification. This one tends to surprise people the most. Far from experiencing the hijab as oppression, many converts describe it as liberating in a very specific sense. It removes their body from the equation of how they're evaluated in public life. Several women interviewed in academic studies describe feeling, for the first time, that people engaged with their mind and personality rather than their appearance. In a culture saturated with advertising, social media comparison, and constant commentary on women's bodies, that shift can feel like genuine relief. Number 3, community and belonging. Western secular life, for all its freedoms, is often described by sociologists as increasingly isolating. Fewer shared institutions, weaker neighborhood ties, more time spent alone or online. Muslim communities, by contrast, tend to be tightly knit, built around regular in-person gatherings, daily prayers, Friday congregation, Eid celebrations, community iftars during Ramadan. For converts craving genuine belonging, that built-in social structure is a powerful draw. Number 4, intellectual engagement with the faith itself. Many converts describe their journey as beginning with genuine intellectual curiosity rather than emotional need. They read the Quran. They studied Islamic philosophy and history. Some describe being drawn to the internal logical consistency they found in Islamic theology, a sense that the questions they'd always had about existence, purpose, and morality were being addressed directly rather than avoided. Number 5, marriage and relationships, though less often than assumed. Yes, some women convert after falling in love with a Muslim partner. But researchers are quick to point out this is far from the dominant driver that popular assumption suggests. Multiple studies find that the majority of female converts point to independent spiritual searching, not romantic relationships, as their primary motivation. The stereotype of women converting for a man turns out to be significantly overstated. It would be dishonest to present this trend as universally smooth. So let's talk about the real difficulties converts often face. Family reactions can be difficult. Many converts describe painful conversations with parents who worry, sometimes out of genuine concern, sometimes out of misinformation that their daughter is joining something dangerous or oppressive. Some relationships take years to repair. A few never fully do. Then there's the social cost of visibility. A woman who begins wearing a hijab becomes instantly, visibly identifiable as Muslim in a way that male converts often aren't. That visibility can invite discrimination in job interviews, in public spaces, sometimes in the form of outright harassment. Studies across several European countries consistently find that visibly Muslim women report higher rates of discrimination than Muslim men, precisely because of this visibility. There's also an internal challenge that rarely gets discussed, the loneliness of straddling two worlds. Converts often describe losing touch with parts of their old social circle while still working to be fully accepted within Muslim communities that sometimes treat converts as outsiders, at least initially. Building a new identity from scratch as an adult is never simple, regardless of what that identity is. Workplace dynamics add another layer of complexity. Several converts interviewed in academic research describe subtle shifts in how colleagues treated them after they began wearing hijab, being passed over for client-facing roles, facing intrusive questions about their sudden religiosity, or simply noticing a coolness that hadn't been there before. Some describe having to become, almost overnight, an informal spokesperson and educator for an entire faith tradition, fielding questions from coworkers and acquaintances that they never signed up to answer. And yet, across nearly every interview and study on this subject, one finding repeats itself. Despite these very real difficulties, the overwhelming majority of converts report no regret. When researchers ask directly whether they would make the same choice again, most say yes, often without hesitation. For most women who convert, the Shahada isn't an ending point. It's a beginning. What follows is often years of learning how to pray, how to read Quranic Arabic, how to navigate family gatherings, workplace norms, and social expectations as a visibly practicing Muslim in a culture not built around Islamic practice. Many converts describe finding their footing through convert-specific support networks, groups, both in-person and online, specifically built to help new Muslims navigate this transition. These communities have grown substantially over the past decade, reflecting just how significant this wave of conversion has become. Mosques in major Western cities increasingly run dedicated new Muslim programs, recognizing that converts often need different support than someone raised within the faith from birth. Over time, most converts describe a settling process, the early intensity of new identity giving way to a steadier, more integrated sense of self. Sophie, several years after her own conversion, put it simply, "It's not the biggest part of my identity that people see anymore. It's just who I am now." It's tempting to treat this trend as a curiosity, an interesting demographic footnote. But it deserves more attention than that, for a simple reason: it directly challenges one of the most persistent assumptions in Western discourse about Islam. The dominant narrative suggests that Islam is something imposed on women, something they endure rather than choose. The reality, at least among this specific and growing population of converts, tells a more complicated story. Educated, financially independent Western women, with every secular alternative available to them, are actively examining Islam and choosing it sometimes precisely because of the structure, modesty, and community that critics frame as restrictive. That doesn't mean every critique of gender dynamics within Muslim communities is invalid, or that every woman's experience is the same. Islam, like every major faith, is practiced along a wide spectrum, and lived experience varies enormously by country, culture, and individual family. But the sheer scale and consistency of this conversion trend suggests something worth taking seriously. For a significant number of Western women, Islam isn't experienced as a cage. It's experienced as an answer to something modern secular life failed to provide. Thank you so much for joining us as we explored one of the most misunderstood trends in modern religious life. We hope this gave you a more complete, honest picture of who these women are and why they're making the choice they're making. If you found this video insightful, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel. It genuinely helps us keep bringing you honest, well-researched content like this. If you have thoughts, questions, or your own experiences related to this topic, we'd love to hear from you in the comments below. We look forward to having you join us on our next journey. Alhamdulillah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.